All right, thanks. So yeah, my job as a filmmaker who's chosen to make a documentary about the decentralized web is a challenge because I have to take everything that you've heard today and try and turn it into a fun, exciting piece of media for everyone. I am happy that I got to go last because I think Danny and Mark and Yisi have really laid a good foundation. They've kind of done the heavy lifting for me, especially Danny covered a lot of really good ground with geography, borders, and sort of the idea of protocol as a way of thinking about the world. But so I'm gonna take a slightly different tack on this and sort of look at the artistic or poetic interpretation of this very complex world that we've been talking about. So I am going to share my screen. Tell me if this works. This looks good.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, great. So how do we depict an invisible world? So I'm a filmmaker and an interactive artist. I've made a bunch of stuff for TV, film festivals, exhibits, but mostly I work in documentary, which basically means I follow my curiosity where it leads me. I explore the world for different kinds of stories to tell stories that make sense of the world. My primary interest is in technology. I'm not a technologist per se. My coding skills are garbage, but I'm really interested in how emerging technologies can influence our social, economic, and political worlds. So for a couple of years, I worked on a show called Cyber War for Vice, and the show was about hacking and national security. So as part of that show, I immersed myself in the geopolitics of technology, which is a fascinating world. And I took a special interest myself in some of the ideas around politics coming out of hacking subcultures. So crypto anarchists, cypherpunks, transparency activists. And it's through this work, tangentially, that I discovered the decentralized web. So discovering the D-Web. Back in 2017, I went to a hacking conference. It was the Hackers Congress at the Institute of Crypto Anarchy. It's interesting, a number of panelists on today's panel, I'll let them identify themselves, have spoken at the Hackers Congress, and a number of people who are presenting on tomorrow's panel, panel number 4, Smuggler, Frank Braun, and Harry Halpin have all sort of spoken here. So back in 2017, I go to this conference, and it's a swirling mix of people from cypherpunk, crypto anarchist communities. And at the time, the big buzzword was cryptocurrency. So this is 2017, so it's before the big cryptocurrency boom, when everyone was launching an initial coin offering. Bitcoin was about to shoot up to its highest price yet at 20K. So there was a lot of excitement around that. I was just trying to wrap my head around the world, the potential, the politics, the community and culture of cryptocurrencies. But in the swirl of all this, a hacker pulled me aside and was like, hey, I hear you're a documentary filmmaker. I know this cryptocurrency stuff is exciting, but the real shit is the decentralized web. So I started researching the decentralized web after that. But at the time, there was so little information out there, especially for a non-technical person like myself. So this article by Stephen Johnson was just about it. And it's more about blockchain than it is about web decentralization. There are bits and pieces in there, and it was like a good door to open for me. But there was just so little information. Any information out there was like way above my head. So I kind of like dropped this story for a bit, and I waited for the world to come into focus more for me. Then last year, out of the blue, I got a message from one of my sources telling me about DWeb Camp. So DWeb Camp. So this was going to be a week-long gathering of people from the DWeb community on an abandoned mushroom farm just outside of San Francisco. I got a chance to look at some of the people who are going. All the people on the panel today. This is where I met Danny. This is where I met Yisi. I had been speaking with Mark beforehand, but it was a real gathering of some of really important people involved in the DWeb space. So I did what anyone would do, and I hopped on a plane to California, and I spent a couple of weeks embedded with these figures on this farm. And it was a fascinating experience. It was a great learning experience. Talking with people, developing the hardware and the software for potential decentralized web really helped me wrap around the technology and how it would work. So here's some images, but there was something beyond just sort of what you might expect from a very tech focused gathering. It wasn't just a technology, but a community. I was struck by the community's dedication to a shared set of values, a lot of the stuff that Danny was talking about. They were all dedicated to addressing the very real problems of the centralized web: censorship, surveillance, and the corporate control of information by tech monopolies, especially Silicon Valley technologies. So the world I found was very rich, filled with interesting people discussing potentially revolutionary technology. And it was a passionate community concerned with very real and very relevant issues. This is great for a documentary filmmaker, but it also has problems. Where is the documentary? So while the world is definitely interesting, everything about the decentralized web resists building a documentary around, or at least a documentary that I would want to watch. Like we can all imagine like a series of explainers, or like we can imagine a documentary where it's like people sitting in front of a camera and being like, well, the decentralized web is a blah, 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 blah. Interesting, but not in my sort of wheelhouse. So what are the challenges for me? First challenge is the decentralized web is not one thing. It's not one simple technology. It's more of a concept about how information should be structured and what web infrastructure might look like to give people maximum control over their data. And to achieve these goals, there are a bunch of different parts of the machine. There's decentralized hardware, there are decentralized protocols, there are decentralized apps. They all do a bunch of things that are loosely connected by this broad general principle of web decentralization. So to talk about the decentralized web, you actually have to talk about a bunch of different things. And that kind of becomes a problem for making like an interesting and engaging documentary. Also because it is complex. The DWeb is complicated. It's almost impossible to talk about without resorting to long, torturous, and didactic explainers. And the thing I've learned as someone who has built their career around making documentaries about technology is that people struggle with documentaries about technology. As interested as a distributed hash table or a CRDT is, I know that most people mentally check out as soon as you use words like hardware or software. Like that's the limit for a broad general audience. So how do we make a documentary about something like this? There are a couple tricks of the trade that we use in documentary to make this easier. Usually what you would do is you would focus on one person or one story. You would follow their journey, the trials and tribulations that they face. There's an obstacle and they overcome it. But this brings us to the next problem. Guess what? The decentralized web is decentralized. So the problem with trying to build a story around it is that it's decentralized. There's no one character to follow. There's a bunch of people doing interesting things, and it is unclear which one of these projects will rise to the top, and it probably won't. I remember when I went to the DWeb camp, I was trying to wrap my head around it. I was trying to like shape everything to a story. And the story that was in my head at the time was like, okay, there's a decentralized protocol war. Which protocol is going to come to is it going to be IPFS? Is it going to be GUN? Is it going to be DAT or Hypercube or whatever it's called now? Like which one of these protocols is going to come to the top? And so I was like pushing everybody like, oh, who's going to win the protocol war? And everyone was like, oh, yeah, no, that's not a real thing. There's never going to be one protocol to rule them all. So no one was taking the bait, which means it's hard to make that like sensational story. And it brings me to the next point. The future is really unclear. The nature of the decentralized web is that there's never going to be a click moment. There's never going to be a moment when they flip the switch and fire the rocket into space. You know, there isn't even going to be like a little light that turns a different color, like turns green, starts flashing. It's a very incremental process. And if everything goes well, you won't even notice it. You won't notice the difference in your web experience. So that makes it really hard to build a story around. And then on top of all this, it is invisible. Numbers on screens are not a great thing to build a documentary around. So what is a filmmaker to do? So I've spent a bunch of time in this community and diving into this world, and I know it's an important story to tell. The issues are real, and the story is fascinating. So I've got to do some work. So I ended up doing my own deep dive conceptually into this world and how it works. And I started off with something I haven't done in a long time, reading theory. One of the people I met at DWeb camp was Tae-yoon Choi of the School for Poetic Computation. And he pushed me to do some digging into theory. And he recommended a book to check out called Protocol by Alexander Galloway. It's a deep dive into the metaphysics of computer protocols. It explores the shift from centralized to decentralized systems of organization and distributed systems of organization. And it was an important text for me in terms of shifting how I thought about the philosophy and metaphysics of the DWeb movement, getting a sense of the big picture of what was going on. And so a key passage for me is this one about the unique nature of computer code. So code is a language, but a very special kind of language. Code is the only language that is executable. As Kittler has pointed out, there exists no word in any ordinary language which does what it says. There's no description of a machine that sets the machine into motion. The imperative voice attempts to affect change through persuasion, but has little real material affect. So code is the first language that actually does what it says. It is a machine for converting meaning into action. So this was a revelatory passage for me because it was a huge mental shift. For me, what it means is instead of focusing on DWeb technology and what it does, I started thinking about the DWeb not as a technology, but as a world that the DWeb creators were trying to bring into existence, a world with its own social and political values and utopian ideals. So maybe the challenge for me as a filmmaker is not to do the work of being a penetrative investigator finding the one true story or one clear linear story that would make a dramatic documentary. Maybe the challenge is about finding a way to depict worlds, the one that currently exists and the one that may exist. World building. So my filmic challenge is one of world building, understanding the world of the D-Web and finding moments where it reveals itself. So much like good science fiction stories, the trick is, oh, sorry, I've gone onto the interpreter thing, very distracting. So like good science fiction stories, the trick is to present the audience with a series of interesting artifacts and situations from the D-Web world that allow them to understand a disorienting and complex technology in a meaningful way. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll try and blast through these. So a key tool of documentaries is cinematic observation, being in a space to capture on film those moments where a world can reveal itself. And here are some examples. At D-Web Camp, I met a network steward of GiphyNet, which is the shared community network in Spain. Unlike most internet services where everyone goes to a central repository to link them to the internet, GiphyNet is a shared community network that allows people to traffic data through their neighbors rather than a central hub. It's very interesting politically because it became a crucial site of resistance to Spanish government attempts to censor information around the Catalonia referendum. Decentralized apps. There's an app called Mapio, where a group of academics have developed a decentralized mapping system that allows indigenous groups to track their resources and feed them into a secure, decentralized database that doesn't sit on a centralized server. The idea is that they can log sensitive wildlife and natural resource sites. This crucial data is under the control of the community, and they can store it without fear of them being the data being accessed by corporations interested in pilfering these resources for exploitation. Then there's some fun stuff. There's this artist piece by Adam McFillin called On the Wire. It's an audio project where Adam does a physical wiretap of decentralized networks and transforms the packet flow into sound collages and complex beats. There's Keep Alive, a Wi-Fi network built into a fake rock in the woods that allows people to access survival manuals, and only by lighting a fire under the rock will the network pop into action. Kyle Drake, another D-Web alumni, has been rebuilding GeoCities websites into a decentralized database, all of these to prevent them from being lost to bit rot and corporate malfeasance. But then we get a little tricky. Protocol developers, much like Mark Nadal. So Mark is fascinating. He's hand-built his own decentralized protocol. It's an important part of the decentralized web story, but it's very difficult to film. So I've been talking to Mark about some strategies for adapting his work into more, maybe like a reenactment or a live scenario. So maybe we use a metaphor where we illustrate with tangible objects that the ways that different packets of information travel around a centralized versus decentralized or distributed web. So it's these kinds of ideas that brings me to the visual world. I'm not making a podcast. I'm making a documentary that explores things through the language of cinema. But what images will work to reinforce the world of the decentralized web? The nice thing is that the D-Web community actually has a bunch of rich cosmologies and repositories of images that keep popping up. So we've all seen this image. I'm surprised this is the first time this image has come up today. It's a key to the decentralized web. We've all seen it a million times. Take a look at, in fact, I think Vitalik maybe in panel number 1 may have brought it up. Either way, it's organizational structure of networks, and it offers us something more. It gives us an opportunity to explore the political valence of the packet. as packet transmission happens via TCP/IP, we can get a sense for the basic building blocks of information dissemination. It opens us up to further poetic exploration. The nature of the relationship between nodes and edges can help us understand balances of power. How is power formed? How is influence wielded in these different structures? And this can be explored in more complex terms. Network graph visualizations. So very popular in the DWeb community. These involve plugging vast amounts of data into algorithmic engines, which find patterns or relationships amongst the data and organizes them into clusters of related information. The end result is these beautiful constellations of nodes that swirl around each other and allow the viewer to draw new insights into real-world connections, making tangible relationships between points of data and key ideas. So using these graphs to parse data about internet infrastructure and corporate control over data, maybe I'm able to map out how big tech corporations exert power over these networks. We can further tease out these ideas of how power is formed in networks. And then there's another imagery the piece of imagery that dovetails quite nicely with this. And that's mycelium networks, which are a powerful image in the DWeb community is mushrooms. And I mean, the initial DWeb camp was held on an abandoned mushroom farm, but mushroom imagery is also used through the entire community as both a hobby and a thought experiment. So mushrooms form these fungal networks underground, and they snake invisibly through the ground and act as an underground conduit, communicating between individual trees in a forest and transporting nutrients between them. So these systems have been proven to be a powerful image as sort of like a biological internet based on decentralized principles where value is held within the chains themselves. It suggests a potential for a new future where meaning and connection is built into the network itself. So I started working with a local artist here in Toronto who propagates mycelial networks, and we're going to be working to grow mycelial networks for the film, capturing how they mirror and alter the kinds of networks our current technology structures inform. Point cloud footage, I'm way over time, so what the hell. To marry these schematic heavy moments with the observational documentary footage, my plan is to use point cloud technology to help document the DWeb community. So what this is it's like a tool of 3D volumetric filmmaking. Point cloud tools are used to capture color and depth data from real world spaces and render them as collections of points fixed in a 3-dimensional space. So much in the same way that a network is a collection of points connected by hidden relationships, point clouds represent real life objects as an aggregate of discrete points. The use of this tool will help the film to visually explore a key problematic of understanding networks. Does the power lie in the points or in their relationship to each other? Much like a network is a collection of relationships between actual nodes, so too is volumetric data. So we've got a world built out of disparate elements. I'm trying to find opportunities where the world can reveal itself. I'm drawing on rich imagery and cosmologies of the DWeb. And I realize it's not a clean linear story, but a rich tapestry. So where do things stand? So as part of my research and conceptual project, I've been working away at identifying these moments, finding the characters and the people, and also working with the visual treatments to anticipate what the final product might look like. Documentaries are living organisms. They change and develop in pre-production, production, and post-production, but having this artistic framework ahead of time helps to build a cohesive final product. So I've got a little bit more conceptual work to do. I've done a lot, and I'm almost ready to start production, which is fine because as a decentralized movement, the DWeb community is scattered around the world. And in this moment of an apocalyptic pandemic, traveling is extremely difficult. But the hope is to start filming as soon as the vaccine makes it possible for us to travel around. And in the meantime, the conceptualization.